One thing that people mistake about my career is that, I've jumped to rise and be promoted when mostly I feel like I've jumped to find a safe working environment. Been fleeing and looking. And so even in this moment, as I've stepped back from other things, what I've been searching for, I think, is peace and balance
Right.
that has not been found. But I think we can create organizations that embrace like peace and balance as like values. Like I just have to believe that that is true in some way, shape, or form.
Hello, and welcome to Revolutionary Leadership, the bi-weekly podcast that shines a spotlight on the visionary leadership approaches Black women have cultivated for generations, yet are too often overlooked. I'm Dr. Kerry Mitchell Brown, a culture architect, racial equity strategist, and scholar of organizational change. For more than 20 years, I have helped leaders, organizations, and communities reimagine what's possible when equity and authenticity guide the way. Each episode, we'll dive deep into conversations that illuminate how Black women integrate community care, radical self-prioritization, and collective capacity building into transformative leadership practices. Together, we'll expand what leadership can look like and what liberation through leadership truly means. Because this is where Black women's stories become tomorrow's blueprints. Welcome back to Revolutionary Leadership, where Black women's stories become tomorrow's blueprint. Today's episode is about intersection. Most leadership frameworks ignore, where race and gender meet, where the standard playbook falls short, and where Black women have been building strategies that actually work when nothing else does. The framework said women's leadership or Black leadership, but we show up as Black women. And that changes everything: how we lead, how we build, what we protect, and what we create for the leaders who come behind us. This isn't a diversity checkbook conversation. This is about power, infrastructure, identity, and the decisions that reveal who we actually are as leaders, especially those ones nobody claps for. We're not just navigating broken systems, we're redesigning them. And sometimes redesigning means saying no to things that look like a rival because we know what we're actually really building. My guest today is Portia Allen-Kyle, a civil rights attorney, strategist, and organizational architect whose work sits at the intersection of law, policy, race, and power. Portia previously served as interim executive director of Color Change, the largest civil rights organization in the country. She's served as senior advisor in the Office of Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Transportation under Secretary Pete Buttigieg in the Biden-Harris administration, and is the founder and principal of FuturaBold, supporting nonprofits through equity-centered organizational alignment and advocacy strategies. She is also the author of the forthcoming book, From Write-Offs to Riches: How Tax Policy Perpetuates the Racial Wealth Gap and Undermines Our Democracy, which is, to put it plainly, exactly the kind of intellectual work that changes how we understand economic power in this country. Her work has been featured in The Washington Post, NPR, NBC News, PBS, Bloomberg Law, and the Associated Press. Portia, welcome to Revolutionary Leadership. I have been looking forward to this conversation since the beginning of the year.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a fun time.
It is definitely going to be an amazing time. As we start to warm up for this conversation, what are you having to drink?
This morning, it is just water.
Water is perfect. I'm enjoying a cup of chai. Before we go deep, I want to do quick rapid fire. 3 questions. First thing that comes to mind. Ready?
Ready.
Okay. First one. What's the one moment that revealed to you that woman and Black were never neutral categories?
I think there are constant moments of reminders, particularly when dealing with white women in professional situations or dealing with Black men in professional situations, that I acutely feel either the Black or the woman or both.
Yes. Okay. Next one. What's one thing people misunderstand about Black led organizations?
Ooh, I think the possibilities, and I'll make the distinction between Black-led white organizations and Black-led, Black-founded organizations, and that when we are engineering things for ourselves to our benefit, there's a lot that is possible that doesn't need to mirror the dysfunction of what already exists.
Oh, that's so true. All right, last one. And this might be the hardest one. What's a dynamic you wish we could talk about more openly within Black communities?
I think what is heaviest on my chest is why there are so many of us who are willing to be complicit or do the dirty work directly of, I'll just say them, of those who are trying to keep us back, keep us subjugated, and keep us in our places, so to speak.
Okay, we are definitely coming back to that one. So, you write specifically about why race still matters. And the way you frame it isn't just about race generally or gender generally. It's about what happens when you're both all the time in every room. I want to understand how you got there. What formed this lens? When did you realize that your leadership, your strategy, your work had to account for both? That there was no other version of you that could opt out of either one.
I think pretty early. And so the Why Race Still Matters project really came to fruition in this one particular week in June in 2013. And so it was like the end of the Supreme Court term. Fisher v. Texas was coming down, which was, about a mediocre white student who,
Yes.
felt that Black students took her place at the University of Texas, despite, a ton of evidence to the contrary. It was a time kind of in the wake of Trayvon Martin, of, just a lot of things going on that
Yes.
felt very needed to talk about not just the kind of social and political commentary. There's no shortage of political commentary, but I think what I realized back then was how much political work and ideological work gets done in the everyday mundane interactions of things that we're either challenging or reinforcing if we're not interrogating them.
Yes. I see that. And I have so much to say. We'll go down a rabbit hole. We will go down a rabbit hole. So, when did you get the language for what you were experiencing? Like, when did it go from just observing to understanding, then to really actually navigating it?
There are sometimes I wonder if I do have the language, and, I think everything is an evolution. I look back sometimes at some of my earlier thoughts and earlier writings and was like,
Yes.
"Oh gosh," like, 'cause you grow as you're
Yes.
exposed to more things. The times also change, right? And so how you talk about things, the way you think about things changes, and I feel like, that has entirely been the case for me. With that said, I feel like there is this intersection of what I learned in school, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
in that, really trying to apply and make sense of things that I had already experienced. And so, I had gone through high school. I went to a vocational high school before I went on to college and went to Wellesley. And even that dynamic was just completely different. But it wasn't until taking classes in college that talked about educational tracking, how students get filtered to certain paths that really then translate to life paths that made sense of what I had experienced and known to be true. And so all along the way, as I experience and then I learn and then I experience and learn and, continue, I don't read as much as I would love to, but many would say that I'm a avid reader. But if I could spend every single day reading and taking things in, I probably would do that. So it'll never be enough for me. But what I consume and how I consume is constantly where I find inspiration and challenge and thinking about ideas, thinking about experiences, and really kind of seeing through, I mentioned before, the mundane, everyday nature of things to really understand And I think for me, interrogate and figure out how and why things are the way they are, which then tells me what are the levers and places where you can do that work to begin to architect something different and find the pathway and the way in to making other outcomes possible, to making other realities an option. And that's the intersection, I think, between the imagination work, that I
Yeah.
like to dream, I
Yes.
like to vision, I like to write and, think about it. And like then the pragmatic ways through years of advocacy and experience and working on racial justice and civil
Yeah.
rights issues of like bringing that vision into life.
Yes. And what I love about where you are right now is that you're taking this lens and applying it to something very concrete. This question of what it actually means to build an organization that's authentically Black, not just Black staff, but Black in its structure, its values, and its infrastructure. You've been sitting with this question. What does it fundamentally mean to be a Black founded, Black run organization? And you at the top talked about these are not the same, but not just an organization with Black people in it, one that actually structured from our values, our context, and our community realities. What breaks when Black organizations copy white organizational models? I know there's been a lot of conversation on, is that a real thing? And what does building something different actually look like?
Yeah, maybe I'll start kind of with the end of that question, the what breaks. And I would say everything breaks. How often have we been through the training, the consultancy, the like, oh no, here's the best practice, and little interrogation of like where the best practice came from
And who determines that it's best?
and who
Best for
determines that it's
whom?
best. And
Right.
most likely it just means something other people have done before. And then you have to ask, well, what other people and under what context and under what conditions? And so it's often the case when you're inside these places and you're moving something and it's like, here's the best practice, that it completely falls apart and often causes more chaos and, upheaval than might have existed before because it just
And
was ill
harm.
fitting. Yeah, and harm in many ways. And
Yes.
the harm ranges and runs the gamut. I think, when folks are thinking of like, how are we thinking about benefit? Retirement benefits, for example. And, the idea that like, well, if you have a stepped vesting schedule, that'll incentivize employees to stay. And that like might have been true in traditional workplaces that were mostly white, homogenous, et cetera. That
And
actually is like
mature. Yeah.
yeah, and mature, right? But also, what we know about Black people, and you hear it often, last hired, first fired. We tend to change jobs more than other folks. We tend to not necessarily be able to stick it out often in toxic environments long enough to be vested. And like the idea of being vested, no one is like, I could put up with my toxic boss, like just enough to get to my 40% vesting and then go.
Right.
People aren't really thinking like that.
Not anymore. It's like I have 5 more years until I'm fully vested. But what does it cost for you to stay? I mean, the number of jobs that I had earlier in my career and the moves because I wanted to get promoted. I wanted to move upward. And the only way at one point in my career to move was to stay for a couple of years, get everything that I needed to get that will prepare me for not the next job, but for the job after that.
Yeah. And, I think it costs a lot for people to stay, both in the monetary sense and in the like, what does it cost to you as a person? It also costs a lot to leave, right? Like by the time you
Absolutely.
kind of jumped from place to place, one thing that people mistake about my career is that, I've jumped to rise and be promoted when mostly I feel like I've jumped to find a safe working environment. Been fleeing and looking. And so even in this moment, as I've stepped back from other things, what I've been searching for, I think, is peace and balance that
Right.
has not been found. But I think we can create organizations that embrace like peace and balance as like values. Like I just have to believe that that is true in some way, shape, or form. I think it's possible to build organizations, we've always been a collective people. I think we can embed collectivity as a value into
Absolutely. Into
organization
leadership. Yeah.
and into
Into
leadership that have
structure.
much
Yes.
better outcomes than what typically exists. And that's hard because everyone has been ingrained and indoctrinated with the traditional, often hierarchical, militaristic in some senses, sense of authority and supervision and management, et cetera. But it doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't have to be that way. And we should stop accepting that that is the only way. There was something that you just said about your searching for places where there is peace, place where you can do really great work. Because you shared something with me before we recorded that I think is one of the most powerful examples of what we're actually talking about. You turned down a position that, by most people's definition, would be a dream job to protect your time, your work, and your family. Most people won't talk about that. They'll talk about the jobs that they took, not about the ones that they said no to. What happened there without all of the reveal? How did you navigate that decision?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first part is getting a lot clearer with myself, as much as I think when you're in an organization or in a role, it's like, well, what can the organization do differently? And, oftentimes there's like also a mirror to look into of like, what can I do differently in interacting with this organization? How can I move differently? Been thinking about that and thinking about my non-negotiables as I was really contemplating this role. It was clear to me that it wasn't just a complementary vision to, what I had for myself where I could just kind of fit it in and do it. It really was an alternative vision and the fidelity of what I am trying to do, how I, wanted to spend my time, how I wanted to show up for family and other things really actually just wasn't compatible with what would be required. And a lot of times we, are either in denial or there's, I think, an aspect of kind of privilege in the moment that I've like leaned into. But the other side of privilege is sacrifice, where in a different relationship with sacrifice, where I'm much clearer on what I need to give up, where I need to negotiate to get the thing that I actually more want for myself. And that has been growth.
I love that. So you've already mapped out what couldn't move, your family, the projects that you want to bring into the world. That decision wasn't hard because you had the clarity. It was already there.
Yeah.
What would you say to Black women leader who face a similar decision right now, where the opportunity looks like everything she supports, what she's supposed to want, but something in her gut says no, because it's usually in our gut. It's just like, yeah, I'll try to figure it out. I've made harder things work, right? And sometimes I used to say, the hardest things that I've done in life are behind me. So I got this. So what would you say to that Black woman leader?
Someone once said to me, attorney in high power position, she had, run organizations, she had worked at high levels of government. And, I had asked her for advice one time. I said, well, is there anything that you wish you would have known earlier in your career? And what she said to me is, when doors open, make sure you want to walk through them.
Ah,
And I was like, oh,
I like that.
and
I
I had
like
so
that.
many thoughts and like, it's okay to like stand at the door, peer through, figure out, ask the question, who all gonna be there? Like
Right.
what's happening on the other side? We
Hmm.
don't need to walk through blindly. And the more that we are intentional and honest with ourselves, like, I would say to this woman, be honest with yourself, be
Hmm.
intentional about your move. In the same way the grass isn't always greener.
Oh, yes,
Some moves that look like up are actually lateral, and some moves that look like up are actually steps backwards. And
absolutely. Yes.
doors go in, multiple directions, right? You step in and you step out, but you have to figure out what side you're already on before you walk through the door.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Because what you just described, that's actually infrastructure question made personal. Building organizations that work for us requires us to first be clear about what works for us. And there's something about exits and about when you say no that Black women navigate very differently than anyone else. So Talk to me about strategic exits, not strategic no's. You said earlier that Black women can't leave the way that other people leave. We can't even leave like Black men leave. What does leaving or declining in a way that honors your integrity, protects your legacy, and keeps you positioned for what's actually next look like?
Whew, this is a great question. And there are a few things that come to mind. I think the first thing that comes to mind is just being honest about, for us in particular, there is an amount of emotional work and labor that even goes into the leave. Whereas we do more of that work while we're there.
Right.
Do some of that work before we even get there. But as we're leaving, we're also managing people's feelings, perceptions, thoughts about our exits, right?
Stories.
And
Yes,
and our
yes.
stories and what narrative do we want people to have? And sometimes you can say F it, right? And just, move on. But not often, depending on, the role and position. There are plenty of things I would love to have gone out, like Angela Bassett walking away from the fire, right?
Right, right. Just throwing a match back.
But you can't always do that. You must,
You
have
can't. You
more
can't.
delicate. And figuring out what that exit looks like is also being clear about the story around the exit. And
Yeah.
sometimes we are exiting to leave toxic environments, right? And
Yes.
sometimes we're exiting for those reasons. And look, I've sat and thought and been yelled at in meetings and all types of
Yes.
things. Maybe there's a price at which you can humiliate me, but this definitely isn't the price.
Right.
You be very clear about what that is. I guess, to be clear, I haven't found the price yet, but or maybe the price doesn't exist.
Maybe it doesn't. For
Maybe
me,
it doesn't, but there's
it
a
does not. It does not.
yeah, but there's a honesty about that. Some people might know what that price is, right? And figuring out both the story of the exit, the story of the ascension, the story of what comes next, the kind of story of what you're doing. And if you're not clear about all of that, people will write that story for you and you will be a character in someone else's vision and dream for you.
Right.
And so navigating that exit, it's really about taking the steps. It's about doing that internal work. It's about figuring out what works for you, what does not, the non-negotiables, and making sure to do that work because, you are the common denominator of wherever you go. If you don't do that work, they'll follow you to the next place.
It'll follow you to the next place. Someone had told me before on big moves like that is to fall back in love with myself and then make the decision.
Yes.
And that was some of the best advice that I had received on exits. And it provided clarity. So, doing the personal work and all of the things, and just to be clear about what options are available and to take the power for your own story. You are building something. You said yes to your book, From Write Offs to Riches, Tax Policy, the Racial Wealth Gap, Democracy. Ugh, that is not one small thing. Talk to me about that work and why now?
Why now is because we're in a moment that requires imagination and building. And when we're thinking about the things, I think the thing that has become clear to me over my career is that what we're doing is not working. How we've been going about it is not working. And I think that ranges from the issues that we have pushed to the forefront and the connections between them, and oftentimes being resigned to small incremental moves when what's really needed is the courage for bold, transformational systemic change. And that, is what brought me into the tax policy space and thinking about the economy. But it also just made it clear for those who care about democracy,
Hmm.
it can't thrive in extremes and can't thrive in the presence of, significant wealth imbalances because those with wealth will use that money to translate to political power and the system will remain unchanged. And so
Remain
the book is
unchanged.
really
Yes.
about what are the structural changes and the overhaul that is needed, not just to right the wrongs and correct the kind of systemic disadvantage and kind of looting of Black wealth that has been
Right.
facilitated by the tax code, but also what's the long-term system that is
Right.
needed for the fair and equitable distribution of the benefits, of tax policy and the burdens, right? We all pay some, we all should get some things. And
Right.
how do we make sure that that is equitable? And so what I am arguing is that, a lot of folks like to skip to well, let's just do the equitable thing. And when we skip to the equitable without doing the redress, we're actually just cementing the inequalities. And so what I'm arguing for is a generational path through two systems, the first that redresses, the second that maintains that equitable distribution.
This is fascinating because you're connecting dots that most people don't even see as related. Tax policy, the racial wealth gap, organizational infrastructure, leadership sustainability, they're all a part of the same system. I want to name what you've laid out here because it isn't just a story, it's framework. So let's build a blueprint together. Here is what I'm hearing as the through line of everything you share today. I want to name 3 principles and I want you to push back, to add to, or to make them sharper. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Perfect. Principle 1, your intersection is not a liability, it's your strategic lens. Black women don't show up as just women or just Black. We show up as both all of the time. And that full identity gives us a vantage point that most frameworks don't account for because they're built from where we stand. We see dynamics others miss. We read rooms others can't read. We carry analysis that others don't have access to. That is not a burden. That's an advantage. Portia, what would you add to that? What does it look like to actually see and use that lens strategically rather than to just carrying it?
I think it involves the recognition and the maybe courage, but not fear is what I would add. 'Cause it's one thing to, have, but we all know people who see things and then don't say anything, just
Right,
let it pass. Like you have to be willing. And it's not always safe to speak up, but it's, kind of
right,
almost never without consequence to
right.
you personally. If, what needs to be said is something of consequence, like that exists in a number of ways, but have to do it anyway. And so I would,
Yes.
add to that the courage, even if it's accompanied by fear, to insert that vantage point and that analysis into the conversation and into the
Yes. So it's not just about seeing more the courage, it's about using what you see to move differently. I love that.
yeah.
Principle 2, know your non negotiables before the opportunity arrives. You made a decision that most people will call impossible. You said no to a dream job, but you were able to do that because you already knew what couldn't move your family, your book, your time. The decision wasn't hard because the clarity was already there. For Black women leaders who hasn't done that mapping yet, where does she start? How does she identify what actually non-negotiable versus what's just uncomfortable?
I'm a big fan of reverse engineering. It seems so simple, but prompts about 1 year, 5 year, 10
Hmm.
years, what your life looks like in retirement. And then reverse engineering what needs to be true for, all of those things and doing that comprehensively. What are your relationships? What do
Hmm.
they look like? It's not just I live in this type of house and I,
Hmm.
travel here and travel there.
Hmm.
What relationships do you hold? How do you nurture those relationships, the time you spend on them? What hobbies do you have? What goals have you achieved and how have you achieved them? And then when you reverse engineer that, it actually, to me, often becomes very, very clear about what works and doesn't work, how to spend time, how to not spend time, what to say yes to, what to say no to, and what, is maybe untested, but there's some room to experiment and try something different and then figure out. And doing that reverse engineering work is, I think, the best use of time that I've ever spent when thinking about life decisions and futures, and then pressure test it, right? Like have your personal board of directors that you can talk to about anything. You can't just tell them the good things, can't just tell you have to tell them the dirty,
Right.
the hard, maybe things you're embarrassed about, but have that trust and connection so that people can, really reflect to you what they see, what they hear, is your thinking right? Is your logic off? And help come to that conclusion.
That's so good. So looking forward, future focus, defining what it is that you want and asking yourself, what does that say that I must do? And paying attention to the relationships where you can work this out and have people journey along with you. Yes, yes, yes. So that's the framework right there. Principle 3, economic power is leadership infrastructure. Your book is making an argument that most people don't connect to leadership. Again, that's tax policy perpetrates the racial wealth gap, and that this is a democracy problem. But I think there's a leadership insight there too. You can't build sustainable organizations without understanding the economic system that shapes what's possible for us. What do you want our listeners to walk away understanding about that connection?
I would maybe say that there are no individual solutions for systemic problems. And
Ah,
I think that ties back to one of the rapid fire questions
uh-huh.
about like what's one thing that I'd want to talk more openly about with the Black community about. And I mentioned something about like why are there so many of us who are willing to kind of do their work, especially when it comes to economics and finances and money, et cetera. It is often our people who are selling pipe dreams to our
Yes.
folks. That the problem isn't the system. The problem is you just don't know how to game the system. The problem is you just don't have enough hustle. You haven't saved enough money, and they'll sell you their course because it's never free. You
It's
gotta buy
never
the
free.
course. You
It's
never
never
buy the
something 99.
yeah.
Yes.
It's always something 99, right? You got to buy the framework. You got to do this. Everybody's going to either truck their way or crypto their way or hustle their way into wealth, and that just isn't how the system works. And I think
That's not how the system works.
those who are more economically and financially fortunate and affluent, and it doesn't mean there aren't exceptions, but I think like those exceptions just need to be more honest about the way in which they are exceptions and stop, trying to undermine the ideas of what is possible in terms of economic mobility by peddling anti-Black narratives of excellence and laziness, right? Like, and
Right,
like,
right.
hustle and not working hard enough, read laziness, and all of
There's
these
so much
things.
in between
There's
and
so
on
much in
a
between,
yeah,
and peddling and telling people that the problem is you. These like individual problem assessments for what are structural problems is actually just undermining our ability to get to a better place collectively.
oh, I love that. This is so powerful. Here's what I want to leave our listeners with. The contemplation prompt for this episode. Where in your leadership have you been waiting for permission to name your non-negotiables? What would change in how you lead, how you build, and what you say yes and no to if you decided your intersection was your greatest strategic advantage? So sit with that, talk it through with someone who gets it. Portia, before we close, where can people find you and stay connected to your amazing work?
You can find me on LinkedIn as Portia Allen-Kyle. I believe I'm the only one. You can find me on Substack, again, Portia Allen-Kyle, but also Why Race Still Matters. That project lives in this iteration on Substack, previously lived years ago on WordPress. You can find me on Instagram, X, as It's Miss Portia. And if you are interested and would like to connect further, FuturaBold, so FuturaBold LLC.com is my future forward consulting firm.
Perfect. And we'll have all of Portia's links in the show notes. So you'll have everything that you need to follow this work. Portia, this conversation was exactly what I knew it would be. You came with your full self, your research, your lived experience, and one of the most powerful real time examples of revolutionary leadership that we've heard this season. Thank you for bringing all of that.
Thank you so much for making space for this conversation.
So, this conversation proves that race still matters, not as a talking point, but as a lived reality that shapes how Black women lead, build, and make decisions that others can't quite understand from the outside. Portia gave us something rare, a real time example of what it looks like to know your non negotiables before an opportunity arrives, to say no to something the world calls a dream because you know what you're actually building, to choose your family, the things that you're putting out in the world, your clarity over a title that would have looked like a rival. That's not sacrifice, that is strategy, that's a blueprint. The work ahead isn't just to navigate systems that weren't built for us, it's to build from our own values, our own vantage point, our own non negotiables, and to leave frameworks behind for other leaders that come after us. That's revolutionary leadership. I want to hear from you. Connect with me on social media at Revolutionary Lead and visit revolutionarylead.com. Tell me, what are your non-negotiables? Where are you using your intersection as a strategic advantage rather than managing it as a burden? And what are you building that the next generation of Black women leaders will be able to use? Your story is part of the blueprint too. Share it with me. And now for my favorite part of the show. This is where women share their experience with my teachings.
My name is Adure Nyekwere. I am a senior program associate at the Vera Institute of Justice. Every year, the Vera Institute of Justice's Reshaping Prosecution Initiative hosts a convening for members of a group of chief elected prosecutors and their diverse allies, regardless of race, sex, or gender, who seek to advance safety and justice across the country. This group is concerned with the way that this work has been especially challenging when undertaken by Black women prosecutors, and is committed to developing strategies to overcome these obstacles. 2025 has been a difficult year for so many people. Everyone has been facing social, financial, and political changes at a rapid pace. And most people wear multiple hats, fulfilling different roles simultaneously and managing different spheres like work, family, and a social life. And when you stack all of that together with that constant change, it can feel insurmountable, especially when you don't have the tools to navigate it. What this program grapples with is the reality of those strategic challenges as they intersect with challenges that are particular to Black women leaders. This cohort was tasked with developing strategies that would equip these leaders to drive profound, lasting change to meet the needs of their communities while also navigating internal and external challenges. And so we sought a facilitator who not only understood the challenges and the landscape, but specialized in the intersectional demands of this role. The search led us to Dr. Kerry Mitchell Brown. With her guidance, we set 3 objectives for the convening. The first was to amass all the participants' existing wisdom and skills and turn them into formalized, portable tools, things they could teach each other or teach others and use more effectively themselves. The second objective was to create a space of deep trust. We needed a place where identities and obligations could be genuinely acknowledged and affirmed. Third, we wanted to build a dynamic brain trust for new and seasoned members to share and build institutional wisdom. What set Kerry apart is that she didn't make our members choose between being vulnerable and being strategic. She promoted a powerful dual mandate, radical personal truth leading to effective leadership. In Kerry's method, personal truth was the starting point for everything. She gave the cohort a structure, the RAISE framework, to transform their emotional labor into collective wisdom and strategies for prioritizing, delegating, and cutting what isn't serving them. There was a tangible mindset shift. The group moved from fighting fires to approaching every challenge like you would a game of chess. Kerry equipped the participants to stop reacting to everything coming at them. Now, they look at the whole picture, understand what's coming, and prioritize actions that protect their mission and their own well-being. To any organizational leader, especially those supporting diverse executive talent, partnering with Dr. Kerry is an investment in not only the sustainability of your top leadership, but into overall organizational health. Kerry's framework uses the power of identity as a strategy. For Black women executives, the pressure is different, and Dr. Kerry's framework is built for their reality. Dr. Kerry's approach helps participants stop spending all their energy reacting to external noise and start leading by responding from core values. That shift is the difference between a leader who burns out and one who leads with sustained purpose for decades. Most importantly, she builds an ecosystem of support, which is where the organizational impact truly begins. Our members have a sustained, intentional network, a powerful leadership cohort that serves as an ongoing brain trust. This infrastructure is culture change work. This is a living resource that upgrades itself as the group expands.
Thank you for sharing your brilliance, your compassion, and your commitment to Black women, leading with power, ease, and strategy. Until next time, lead brilliantly. Thank you for listening to Revolutionary Leadership. If today's conversation sparked something in you, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share this episode with another change maker in your life. Until next time, keep leading with purpose, joy, and revolution.